Once again, thanks a lot, Akudo, for sort of giving your appearance at the platform of RESO. RESO is a platform for expanding and exploring social possibilities and humanity at the same time. From a research point of view, our brand product is international and national interviews that we conduct in order to expand, in order to explore social possibilities and research possibilities so that we can, sort of disseminate this information and cause awareness, mass awareness among the masses and people for the betterment of our society. And it is always a blessing and a kind of a better possibilities for us also to have people like you so that we can have an experience expansion and better possibilities for research and academic pursuits. My first questions, it's not just exactly a question but kind of I would request you that why don't you just give a little introduction of yours to our audience, and at the same time just tell us about your Heads Together project at your university.
I appreciate it's midnight where you are, so it's a huge commitment, and I've watched a few of your videos, and it's impressive the work you're doing to improve research, and so it's an honor to be here. So my name is Akudo. I'm a social worker by training, and I'm also an early years professional. But I currently work as a lecturer in social work at Canterbury Christchurch University. And then I'm also part of a research group of academics. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to improve social worker knowledge of brain injury. And so that's why I'm part of the Heads Together project. So Heads Together is a group of academics. It's a multi-university group led by Professor Andrew Bateman. And what we've decided to do is we've noticed that even research has also highlighted that there's need for brain injury related social work practice. And so what we've done is we've created a work package. We've also applied for funding from the National Institute for Health and Social Care Research in the UK. And you might ask, why brain injury? The brain plays a very important role in the body. So more than any other part of the body, it's the determinant of an individual's unique characteristics. So your memory, your function, it coordinates and controls functionality, such as your emotions, your balance, interactions. And it serves as a reservoir of information and your memories. Therefore, any damage or injury to the brain may be serious, it can be severe, it can even be catastrophic. And then the long-term effects might be personality changes, cognitive impairments. And the thing about brain injury is that it can happen to anybody. So even mild traumatic brain injuries have long-lasting effects. I was at the North American Brain Injury Association's 17th Conference on Brain Injury in Las Vegas in March. And what they're trying to do is actually to recategorize mild traumatic brain injuries because of the long-term effects it has on people. So we found out that a lot of social workers don't know about brain injury. And I was actually surprised that the same issues we're having in the UK, other professionals and other colleagues in the US have the same issues around training, increased need for awareness of brain injury. So I was going to talk about the impact on children, adults, and families. So when I talk about brain injury, I don't just talk about the person who has the injury. I talk about people affected by brain injury. So family members, spouse, your carer, professionals even. And the capricious nature of brain injury makes it such that it's not always visible. So sometimes it's hidden. I worked with a young person who was diagnosed with autism and at 13. And so it was just a chance conversation that we realized actually it wasn't autism, but a brain injury due to oxygen deprivation at birth. So you can have a brain injury at birth, but it then begins to manifest as behavioral problems in your teenage or adult years. And so people go through life not actually knowing that they have that condition, because even with sports injuries and all. And so there are issues around with sleep disturbance, there's headaches, behavioral issues. Sometimes it manifests as mental health problems. And people are not able to maintain jobs or employment or education. And there's issues around fatigue, there's problem around with forgetfulness, memory issues. I wrote an article today for Canterbury Christchurch where I mentioned a young person I worked with. He had craniopharyngioma, which is a type of brain tumor. Very polite and intelligent young person, but he's manifested in word finding and word processing difficulty. And so, because of the nature, you might not even know that you have a brain injury. And so, that's why it's important. I always tell my students, and then when I'm training social workers, to actually find out, dig deep a bit, and find out what exactly is going on. Is it a brain injury? Is it, could you have been concussion from maybe childhood or in your teenage years? So, because I'm in the UK, it's at a cost of £15 billion every year. So the statistics shows that one person that's admitted in hospital every 90 seconds. So I don't know how long we've been here. So you can imagine how many people have been admitted in hospital with a brain injury whilst we're having this conversation. And it's the leading cause of death and disability for people aged 0 to 40 in the UK. So it's been called a global health epidemic.
Global health.
And it's
okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and it's not. It's such that it's not always spoken about, but people suffer from it. So that's why we wanted to bridge that gap between social work and
Okay.
brain injury. So I've just explained why we decided to go into brain injury.
Okay. Half of it has already been answered by you. But my next
Okay.
question from you is like, what do you think is brain injury an individual problem for the people who are sort of, infected by it or inflicted by brain injuries, or it's like a collective kind of impact? Family members also are infected and sort of, influenced because they also experience that trauma and pain which is experienced by the patient itself or himself or
Yeah.
herself. But at the same time, those family members, part of, since like the person is a part of family, are they also being impacted and influenced, kind of, that impact and pain and trauma also happens to them or not?
It's a scenario for you. Imagine a husband who is maybe the breadwinner of the family, so he's the main income earner, and he's married to a woman who is just a stay-at-home mom, and suddenly he has a brain injury, so that affects his income, his sense of dignity as a man, his pride in looking after his family. And so there's a paradox of absence and presence. So that person, even though he's physically present, is absent. And so the dynamic of the relationship changes such that the wife, who is just a spouse, at that point becomes a carer. So it has an impact. And then you look at the children. So in the course of doing Heads Together, I interviewed social workers. And it was a light bulb moment for one of my colleagues when she said that actually we're working with parents and we're saying that they're neglecting their children, the issues around child abuse, child neglect, but nobody's actually finding out if the parent has a brain injury and they're not getting the right kind of support. Because what happens is that people actually slip through the net because they're not getting support that is brain injury specific. So imagine the family have painted that scenario. So there's loss of income, loss of identity. The kind of relationship they have has changed. Dynamics has changed. And it not only affects that person. And then if it's a family that has a strong sense of, devotion to their marriage, we then expect the woman to be married to the man who is physically there but absent. So it's not the same person anymore. And sometimes there might be personality changes. There's something called paradox of the frontal lobe, where when you go to assess people, they can admit to functionality, which they can't even carry out in real life. So if you ask the person, are you able to manage your finances? The man will say yes. And that's because the assessment process actually provides scaffolding for that person. But he might not have an awareness because of lack of insight into the changes that has occurred. So it's probably the spouse that would say no. And so Mark Holloway, who's someone I work who inspires me in his research, extensive research in brain injury, actually recommends that we do real world assessments. So don't just take the person's word for it, but find out if the person can actually do it. And so if that person admits that he can manage his finances, but then goes out and spends all the family income, how would you expect the family member to respond to that? So brain injury affects not just the person, the injured person, but other family members, the community even. I've mentioned how it costs the UK £15 billion per annum. So there are issues around even maintaining employment. And so even the criminal justice system, people have issues with their behaviors and get into trouble, get into fights and they go to prison because they have a brain injury. I did a training a few years ago with a local authority, and it was because a young person had committed suicide, and the social worker who was supporting him didn't even know he had a brain injury. So of course there's loss of life. So it can be catastrophic because people are not getting the right kind of support. And then you then imagine that person who has committed suicide, the impact it has on his family also. So it has extensive impact on family members. I interviewed people who worked, people in specialist services during the lockdown. And because of the isolation that brain injury brings, you find that people who are injured might not even understand what's going on with them. And so they're locked. Imagine being in that situation where maybe there's violence or domestic abuse. And you don't know how to actually support. And the family member, because it's not trained, doesn't even understand what has happened to the spouse. So there are complexities that arise within the families. And of course, what I'm trying to say is, yes, brain injury affects the other person, but family members, spouses, even professionals, especially where there's no training to support.
Wonderful said. I mean, relevant for us to understand for our audience also, because it is important to have different perspectives and different explanations from different experts, people who have professional dexterity and experience with them, and important to understand things from a practical point of view. So my next question from you is like, how social work as a science can be instrumental in healing the psychological issues prevalent in global human society?
That's a really good question. And that's why I look at it from the social model of disablism. So we have the medical model of disablism, where you look at the condition. So the doctor wants to treat the condition. But schools of thought have actually said that model problematizes and categorizes people according to their ailment. But the social model of disablism looks at how the environment disables people. And so the young person I mentioned earlier on who suffered from a brain tumor, when you look at his file, he had suffered from craniofaryngema, he had an optic nerve damage following 3 brain surgeries, he had word processing and word finding difficulties. And then he wanted to be a pilot, but because he was blind in one eye and suffered from epileptic seizures, he couldn't follow that career pathway. But when I met him, he was the most articulate and polite young person. Of course, there were issues with word finding and word processing difficulties. So we don't look at, as social workers, we don't look at what the issue is. We look at how to draw out the strength from that person. And so he's South Asian and comes from a very high functioning family, very high achieving. And so it was important to understand the issues. There were issues around social isolation, issues around cultural awareness. It's important to situate people within their environment. So I did some research and found out that where he comes from, there was premium placed on education. His father had moved from Asia to the UK in search of a better life. And so we can't discount all of that. It's important to understand where people are, the effect of migration, for instance. What is culture to them, to that person? So that's what the social worker looks at. And so social work then helps to look at that person in context. If there were issues around social isolation, for instance, I looked at specialist services that could provide support for that young person. But what about other groups? other Asian groups that understand the person's language, and not just literal, but figuratively also, that can speak and relate with that person's issues. Another example I also like to give when you're talking about psychological effects is there's a young person I worked with in the hospital, and she wanted to commit suicide. You know, comes again, South Asian, comes from high achieving family, and at some point she refused to eat the hospital food. As simple as that. If you look at it from the medical perspective, you look at the calorific content and nutritional values. But I wanted to find out what does food mean to this girl. She only wanted to eat her mother's food. So food is culture. Food is a link to home. If so, in my class, when I give this example, I ask, for instance, the white students, if you were going to see somebody in the hospital, what would you take? Do you know where you're going? Probably a card of flowers. Then I'll ask the Asians, we'll take food. The students will tell you, we'll take food to the person, a change of clothes. And so if you don't understand people, you can look at them through a particular lens that is not the right lens. So what does culture mean to that person? Where are the power dynamics? And so that's the role that social work plays. As a science and as a social science, we look at the person, but we look at the person and the environment, the person in the environment. So that young person, it made a difference for her that she was able to have that time with her parents. When they eat, they pray. So it was a connection to home. It was not just her refusing the hospital food. The meal itself, food is culture, food is power. Food is a way of, people use it as a sense of pride. I can cook. But other people might not understand it. And that's the bridge, we're trying to build over research and people's experiences. Yeah.
That's right. As for like my understanding, I understand there is a medical perspective, medical point of view approach we want to understand. Then there is a social structure, which is like altogether very different. So there must be a compatibility, there must be a kind of interconnectedness between medical and then social system. Then only a proper healing, a proper medication, whatever it is, to sort of rehab those people, pull them back on right track, on normal track, will become possible. That's what I understand. Thanks a lot for your greater insights.
Yes, so some people actually and say if we look at psychological or mental health diagnosis, and you say that a child has chronic bereavement disorder, that it's a natural process because the girl was grieving. And you have to understand, the Western lens or medical lens, for instance, can look at the attachment theory. But because she's South Asian, she had strong links to her grandmother. And so because her grandmother had passed on, she was grieving. And so that affected her mental health. So that bridge, the bridge between the social worker and the medical model was me stepping in to understand that there was a grieving process going on here. She was trying to keep that connection to home. And understanding that we don't look at the person in isolation, but what are the other contributing factors that might be affecting that person?
Great. But my next question, very important question, is like about what opportunities does research in social science offer to promote social adherence and solidarity? When we talk about like collectivism, even if I study sociology, we study the work of Emile Durkheim. He talks about social cohesiveness, social solidarity, and how does research become instrumental, because a lot of research is required in social sciences research. Social sciences dominant, but at the same time, as we figure out like basic fundamental research, what you're talking about is like more applied research. But my question is very simple. My question is very straightforward. What opportunities does research in social sciences offer to promote social adherence and solidarity? Please comment.
To give examples so that way it helps promote understanding. And I like to give example from the Heads Together project, for instance. We're a research group of academics, but we've carried out extensive research. We've written a survey article that will be published soon, and then we have a systematic review on the current evidence base of social work knowledge of brain injury. But we've also got an expert by experience group. And so people with lived experience of brain they inform the research. So in March at Canterbury Christchurch University, I hosted a play called Making Headway. That play brings the lived experience of brain injury to life. But we had 2 performances, and in the room we had people with brain injury, had students, medical students, we had nurses, we had social work students, we had lecturers, and people who also work with charitable organizations. All of them, that interdisciplinary approach feeds into the research. So as a social worker, I am mandated to promote rights of participation. And promoting rights of participation is not a tokenistic approach to research, but making sure that people who have that lived experience have their voices heard. So even the example of the young person I gave, it's understanding who that person is, but also with bereavement, understanding that research makes them emphasize that the voice of that young person is heard. So it's about promoting rights of participation, bringing different groups together. I believe in co-production of knowledge. So I'm not the expert in the room, but we're working together collaboratively to co-produce knowledge. So the person with the lived experience of brain injury, the person who's supporting the carer, the family members, spouses. We also had spouses in the room. So everybody working together to inspire and inform research. And so that's how that's the approach I like to adopt. Not just the experts who sit in the university, but getting people together. And what is impressive and what's interesting is that as the research and as time progresses, you begin to see how people respond. They want to hear their voice. It's an opportunity to have their voices heard. They want to be seen and be respected because they are the experts in their own quotidian life. It's not the professor who is in the room, but that person with the lived experience. So this provides an opportunity for social cohesion. It provides an opportunity for people to come together and have their voices heard. So it's the lived experience that we're promoting, but we're also backing it up with research. And that's what I want to actually include in my research going forward. Having the voices of people who have lived experience, people who know what it feels like. So because you can do your research, but there's somebody who lives with that person at the end of the day when the doors are shut, when there's no other professional. That's what I want to actually promote. It's about promoting social justice and human rights and promoting the rights of people with disabilities, for instance. It's about even the protected characteristics. We have the Equality Act, the United Nations rights, all of that, Human Rights Act. So it's about promoting and appreciating people for who they are. Okay. And I think that's the bedrock of social work, social justice, and getting people respecting the rights of people and the rights to be heard, actually.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for your deeper insights. My last question, before I ask my last question, we've also seen your recent interview on global law enforcement. That was really wonderful. But your experience, I figure out, is like more into academics and research. So something connected with that. The question is, how your research and project work will benefit society at large in the current time frame. And we've seen a bit of it, a kind of, glimpse of it in your recent interview. So would you please just throw light and sort of let our audience know what you are into in terms of like your research and project work and how you think that's going to cause benefit in the current time frame in the society that you're part of?
14th of May, which is a few days ago, the National Health Institute for Health and Social Care Research in the UK announced a £40 million investment into brain tumor research. And I am so pleased about that investment because I believe that it will make a difference in the lives of people who are affected by brain tumor. So there are two types of brain tumor: the malignant and the benign. So you have people who have life-limiting brain tumors, and so it's about quality of life even at end of life. So what that research does is that it throws light into the condition. I've mentioned the importance of having the voices of people heard. It provides insight into, like, for instance, the charities that support brain tumor. I can mention Brain Trust, for instance. I'd interviewed the co-founder of Brain Trust, and it throws light on how much work they do at great personal cost to actually support people with brain tumor. So there's someone from Child Brain Injury Trust, for instance, who, when he talks in a very calm, measured way. This is exactly how he talks, in a very calm, measured way. And I asked him why, and he said it's because sometimes he's the last person that sits with the family as the life support machine is being switched off for their child. So he's learned to measure his tone. So tonality is important when he's working with families, because he works with children with neurodegenerative diseases. And so what research does is that it shines a light. You then hear about medical advancement. What I found in Vegas, for instance, at the NABIS conference, was that we all have the same challenges, but people are adapting and working actually hard to provide solutions to problems. So research provides information into how practice. So if for instance you don't keep up to date with research, you're staying back with, you're not up to date, and that can actually impact the service provision for people with that condition. So in this present time, research shines a light, but it also brings latest medical advancement and treatment options. Even with technology, we all know about AI now and how we're trying to modify technology. So research actually brings that to the everyday person. So and that's why it's important, for instance, to attend conferences or even listen to programs like yours, where you're being up to date with research and you're disseminating information so that the average person can hear it. And that's why when I share my information, it's okay to come and give the statistics. So I can tell you, for instance, that maybe over 1 million people in the UK have brain injury. I can give you all the terms and all the research questions and methodologies, but how does that impact the person? And so what research does is that it provides an avenue for us to have a conversation. That's what I actually want. For us to have a natural conversation about brain injury, about brain tumor, how it impacts the child who has to be a carer for his parent. And the research actually identifies a gap in service provision and tries to bridge that gap so that people have a clear understanding of what's going on in people's lives. And I think that's the important role that research plays. So the announcement by the NIHR about 40 billion investment into brain tumor research actually says that it was formulated by researchers and specialist brain injury charities. So you have people who are academics, but you also have people in charities, people who are engaged in everyday work, supporting people with brain tumors, people who are giving their lives to actually support these people. And that cohesion, that interdisciplinary approach can ultimately only improve outcomes for people who have brain tumors or other conditions.
Thanks a lot, Akudo. Speaking from form of research from England, and your insights, your sharings, deeper insights have really helped our audience, like knowing the medical perspective of this. The problem we are talking about, and at the same time, social perspective and how it is important for us to understand the relevance of social perspective at the same time. Otherwise, the medical input, the medical intervention, maybe just handicap if there is no compatible social possibilities around. So that is what I understand as this is what we do.
Meant to disseminating research and information. This is a great platform to share information, and people can actually access information. There's a lot of information out there, but it's important to have the right kind of information. And so the fact that you're presenting research in a way that's accessible to the common man is noteworthy and impressive. And I'd like to say thank you for the work you're doing. And I'm sure it makes a difference. I'm sure it makes a difference because I've watched a few of your videos. But ultimately, I'd like, and this is my wish list, maybe more funding into research for brain injury and brain tumors. And I see, for instance, the work that researchers do, the work that charities that support people with brain injury put in, the effort they put in. And sometimes it might almost seem like as if it's unrewarded, but the impact it has on that person is profound.